guys, so for today's video, it was actually suggested to me by one of you guys in a past video, and I don't remember which one or who said it, so I apologize if this is your idea and I'm not giving you credit for it, but they suggested that I talk about the most stigmatized mental illnesses, and I think this is a great opportunity to talk about these specific illnesses, especially because I get requested all the time to talk about these specific illnesses. But part of the goal of my channel isn't just reducing the stigma for the most common mental illnesses, most popular, if you will, you know, like anxiety and depression and bipolar, things like that. It's not just about reducing the stigma of those illnesses. We really need to work on, if anything, these ones specifically. We've made a lot of progress on disorders like depression and anxiety. I mean, there's a reason for that. They are the most common. The ones I'm going to talk about today are less common, but we can't ignore those people in the world, and we can't ignore the fact that they also need help in reducing the stigma of their own mental illnesses. So hopefully this video brings a little bit of awareness. I'm going to share some statistics and websites with you guys to help further education about these illnesses and to spread the knowledge that these are not scary mental illnesses. Not only are these the most stigmatized mental illnesses, but the stigma that goes along with them are usually the most harmful. The illnesses I'll talk about today are usually the ones that are perceived to be the most violent or manipulative or dangerous, and people don't want to be around them. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and get into the first one. I thought I would start out with borderline personality disorder because this is one that I get messaged about all the time and get asked to do a whole video on specifically, which I don't necessarily feel comfortable doing that because I don't have experience with borderline, nor do I know anyone who has borderline personality disorder. So I thought I would mention it in this video. I thought this was a good video to talk about it in because it is one of the most stigmatized mental illnesses. Now, this is also known as the leprosy of mental illnesses because when people, I'm not saying everyone, but some people, when they hear the word borderline personality disorder, they tend to want to run away because of the stigma attached to it and the stereotypes that go along with it. No one really wants to touch it or be around someone who has it. And that's not saying that I feel like that or generally people feel like that. I'm just saying there is a stigma out there that causes some people to feel like that. This is often the mental illness that is portrayed in movies and as an explanation of why the characters are acting crazy. And I just want to point out that media is one of the strongest reinforcers of mental illness stigma. To briefly explain what borderline personality disorder is, it is basically a hypersensitivity of emotions, specifically negative ones. They usually feel emotions to the extreme, and it takes a lot longer for them to reach a baseline level. There's obviously many more symptoms that go along with this, in addition to behavioral, psychological, cognitive, things like that. So I did a whole video on personality disorders where I kind of went more into depth about borderline. If you want to watch that, I will link it, of course. Anyway, I found an article on themighty.com and it's called Borderline Personality Disorder Stigma. At one point in the article, she talks about how she overheard her coworkers talking about people with borderline personality disorder. I'm gonna start calling it BPD if that's okay. One of her coworkers had said that people with BPD are borderline human and will fake pain just to manipulate people. And one said, "I can smell borderlines from a mile away." And these are obviously very insensitive comments, let alone the fact that they called them borderlines. Like, we don't identify as our illness. We're not like, "Hello, I'm Sarah and I have borderline." Like, no, you don't introduce yourself with your illness. So I think it's really inappropriate to call someone by their illness or group them together borderlines. That's like saying schizophrenics, things like that. No, that's inappropriate. We don't do that. I think that's one of the stereotypes and part of the stigma is that they will fake anything to manipulate you. And although some people do indeed do this, it doesn't necessarily mean they can control it or that it's their fault or their issue. Now, because it is a personality disorder, it is a chronic mental illness, meaning you have it for life. But I think part of the stigma is also people believing that it's untreatable because it's a personality disorder, and that is completely false. Yes, being a personality disorder makes it more difficult to diagnose and treat, but that does not mean it is impossible. It is a little bit more complicated when you're dealing with a personality disorder, but they can live completely normal, healthy lives, have healthy relationships with the right treatment processes, whether that be medication, therapy, cognitive behavioral, things like that. And actually the stigma of this illness can be so detrimental to the people who are actually experiencing it. It's estimated that 1 in 10 people who have borderline personality disorder commit suicide, and 8 out of 10 people attempt suicide at least 3 times in their life. That is horrifying to me. That is a majority of people who are diagnosed with this disorder that attempt suicide. And you can't tell me that the stigma is not a part of that in some way. Now, BPD is also stigmatized amongst professionals, which is the scary part. You'd think that they would take them all seriously. Well, not all mental illnesses are created equal in the mental health field. I read online that someone was staying in a hospital and she was diagnosed with BPD, and she showed signs of wanting to commit suicide. She even showed her suicide letter to a professional, and when she attempted it and they had to help her through that, she asked, "Why was I overlooked? Why did you not listen to me? I reached out for help to you guys." And their response was that we had another borderline in here. There they are using it as a noun to describe someone. And every other word out of her mouth was suicide, so we just assumed that you were the same way. Which, that is scary to me, that a professional would think that just because someone has the same mental illness that they would have the same symptoms or be the same person. Professionals especially should know that everyone experiences every mental illness differently. And I do want to point out that not all professionals are like this. Not all hospitals and places are like this. But there is still a stigma within the mental health professional world, which is so scary. And obviously when we hear those stories, we're less likely to want to reach out for help as well, because we're not going to be taken seriously even by the people who are known to help us. If you have borderline personality disorder and have ever experienced stigma in your life, whether it be from your peers, your family, your friends, or from professionals, please, I would love it if you feel comfortable, of course, sharing your experiences down below. The next mental illness we're going to be talking about today that is highly stigmatized is dissociative identity disorder, otherwise known as DID, and formerly known as multiple personality disorder. I think the reason why this is so stigmatized is there's still a question in the world of, is this even real? Some professionals still don't believe that this is a legit mental illness. This illness has, like I said, with the borderline, has a lot of facets to it, and it's different for everybody, but mostly what it's known for is the characteristic of altered consciousness, or alters, or multiple personalities, so on. You get the gist. This is sometimes portrayed in media, and I get real nervous when I see that it's going to be portrayed, or that it's portrayed in a show or a movie, because it is so difficult to exhibit this accurately. There are some YouTube videos on here of people showing their different alters and going through the changes and things like that. If you're curious, you can look up some of those videos. But there is a show that I really enjoyed, and that's called United States of Tara. It was canceled, which I am super bummed about, but I love that show. It did an okay job showing what it's actually like. The only thing that I think isn't that accurate is the portrayal of her alters being so vastly different, even different genders, which that can happen, but I think it's more likely that they would be different but still similar in ways. The alters aren't always so obvious to differentiate from each other. Usually what media will do when they are taking DID and showing it in a show or a movie or something is they will amplify the alters and the symptoms and exaggerate kind of the personalities, if you will. Now the problem with this is that it can reinforce the stigma even stronger, especially if one or more of the personalities or alters that they're portraying is violent. Of course, the movie came out from M. Night Shyamalan called Split. That one is a little bit touchy because, I mean, it does portray DID. It even shows him going to therapy and whatnot, and the thing I had with that is that it seemed that his alters were aware of each other, and even in United States of Tara, I think they were aware, but the main person is not aware of what is going on, and they cannot switch between them, and it seemed like in Split that was almost a plot point of there are certain personalities that could take over the others, and I just don't think that switch is that accurate. Usually people who are diagnosed with DID have severe trauma in their past. That's usually the cause of it, and it's actually a coping mechanism for their brain to shut down and to block out that part of their mind. So it's a form of protection, and you do see that in United States of Tara and Split. The character had severe trauma, and these personalities or alters developed to protect the main person. I think people also have a misconception that DID is the same as schizophrenia or similar to schizophrenia, because with schizophrenia, if you have auditory hallucinations, you can hear voices or talk to people. It's not the same thing as if you're going through a change in your consciousness or you have multiple alters in your mind. So they're completely different. Also, DID is not a personality disorder. It's a dissociative disorder. So again, if you feel comfortable sharing, if you have experienced DID, it is a very rare disorder, but if you feel comfortable sharing, I'd love to hear your experiences as well. The next mental illness we're going to talk about, I think, is pretty obviously stigmatized, and that is schizophrenia. This is characterized by delusions, disorientation, paranoia, hallucinations, and most common are auditory. I think that's a misconception, is that they see a lot of stuff usually, and although you can, it's more rare and it's more common to hear voices or have auditory hallucinations. There's, of course, with every disorder, many symptoms: psychological, cognitive, interpersonal things that are going on, so that's just a little bit, like 2% of what it actually is. But not everyone who's diagnosed with schizophrenia experiences every symptom, and the disorder looks different in every individual. And that goes for all disorders as well, by the way. So one of the biggest and most hurtful stereotypes about schizophrenia is that anyone who is diagnosed with it is violent, and this is often reinforced by the media. I think A Beautiful Mind is a good portrayal of schizophrenia in not necessarily a positive, because you see his struggles. It is based on a true story, but you see kind of a more accurate representation of what the symptoms are actually like. Again, it's probably heightened and exaggerated for a movie, but I think that's the most accurate portrayal, and it shows him not being violent, which is great. So based on a National Mental Health Association survey, only 27% of the general society believe that there's a successful treatment for schizophrenia. 50% of the general population believe that if you're diagnosed with depression, you can still hold a normal job and raise a family. However, only 14% of those people believe that you can do the same things if you're diagnosed with schizophrenia. So most of the population believes that if you have schizophrenia, you're not able to function in life, and you can't have a family, and you can't have kids. Well, you can, but you just can't raise them. So this just shows how strong that stigma actually is. The fact that only 14% of people believe that they can lead healthy lives and have healthy relationships and raise children is horrifying. The last one I want to touch on isn't necessarily one mental illness in general, but it's something I think is overlooked quite a lot, although we are making strides to better the stigma with this, but that is mental illnesses in men. There's a great movie called Man Up, and I recommend everyone watching it, even women, and it kind of gives us a better idea of what it's like to actually be a man in society. And I know there's so much talk about like hating men and just this third wave feminism that's going on right now. I know they're probably joking most of the time and like doing it for the meme, you know, and social media. But when you say these things about hating men and all this stuff, granted, I know it's probably not that serious, but I know that there's people out there who do say it seriously. I mean, I'm not going to talk too much about feminism, but let's be real. Feminism is equality. That's all it is equality, especially intersectional feminism, which is the most important kind. And I'm not saying they have it the worst in society by any means, but we cannot ignore their mental health struggles. They commit suicide more often than women, and there's a reason for that. There's a stigma that goes with men having mental illnesses and showing emotion and showing weakness, as it's considered, and I think they need to be heard. I think they struggle in their own ways in society, and we can't ignore that. So I also read a really good article on Psychology Today called Stigma of Mental Illnesses Making Us Sicker. Just a couple points from the article that I found the most interesting. Basically, the root of stigma is the perception of the mental illness and the fear of it. The fear is mostly associated with these disorders that I've talked about today, and probably a dozen more. I don't think many people are that afraid of someone with depression or anxiety, but they are stigmatized to be seen as more weak, but that's not really the point of this video. The fear of these disorders causes them to have social distance from people who are diagnosed with these disorders, and that distancing can cause social isolation for that person and extreme loneliness. And that's just not healthy for anyone, let alone someone who's already struggling with a mental illness. If someone comes out about having one of these mental illnesses, sometimes people will pull away and be afraid and like think that, you know, their mind just spirals and they have all these expectations and perceptions about the mental illness because of society and the stigma in society. And it's that rejection that can then become harmful to the person who's experiencing the mental illness. Also, there's something called self-stigma, which I think sometimes can be even stronger than stigma in society, and that is when the person who's dealing with the mental illness is aware of the stigma in society and will internalize that and kind of blame themselves and hurt themselves in that way. And they start to believe things about their own mental illnesses, or that they're not worthy, or that they're, you know, lower than everyone else. And they can have self-esteem issues, and it can just kind of spiral in their mind when they have this self-stigma thing going on in the brain. So I could probably do a part 2 to this, but that's all we're going to cover in today's video. Let me know what you believe to be the most stigmatized mental illnesses, or if you have any experience with stigma of your own mental illness that you've seen or experienced in your life. Leave all that down below, and some video requests would be great as well. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.